And welcome to your introduction to your SAQ, your short answer question paper for the unit AP502. For this unit, you're going to be looking at the professional standards within the aesthetic practice. So as with previous SAQ papers you may have completed, there is a minimum pass mark. There is a minimum pass mark for each question, and these will accumulate to a minimum pass mark for the whole paper itself. So this question paper is out of 7 questions. Each question is out of 10, so a maximum of 70 marks. And to gain the minimum pass mark for the whole paper, you have to get a points worth 46 out of 70. Now, thinking about that, a minimum pass mark for each question is 4 marks. If you only get 4 marks for 7 questions, that will not add up to the minimum 46 out of 70. It means that the paper as a whole is too low. So you need to make sure that you are looking at any feedback you get given, and you should be aiming for the middle mark points as a standard. So that way you've got stronger questions where you might be able to get higher, and then questions that are not your forte, you can score a little bit lower because accumulative points might add up to the minimum of 46 out of 70. As with previous feedback, you'll see on the first bullet point on here, the marking criteria that is given to your markers, they have to take into consideration the level of contact, how you've applied your theory, your knowledge and understanding of what you have researched, your presentation with regards to your formatting. So make sure you follow those assignment formatting requirements of the spacing, and even though it's not compulsory to reference, it is kind of good practice, a standard higher order thinking skill practice to include references, especially if you're wanting to get the higher marks. The referencing might not have to be perfect, but at least attempt it. So as you can see, there's 7 questions in this unit, so 1 less than your previous unit. So that might help with thinking about just a little bit less work than maybe you put in last time. But you'll see that they are all very similar in what they're asking you to do. So for question 1, you're going to evaluate the disparity. So it's looking at the differences between a medic and a non-medic, or in the wording they've used here, healthcare and non-healthcare professional. You're looking at the differences that are required by law and even ethically and morally, if you want to look at it, but it's looking at the differences in the level of clinical insurance that is required. So again, you've got to look at the positives and negatives from both sides. You can look at sort of giving your point of view, especially with the current climate, and you're going to be able to even look at things that I wasn't able to look at in my assignment with regards to obviously the legislation and the proposal that has been put through at the minute with the public consultation. So you can obviously write your opinions, and do you agree with this evidence or not? Try not to go too much off on a tangent, because you've got sort of in that word count of 200 to 400 words. But it's trying to personalize and look at the positives and negatives. You find all the information out, and then you come to the conclusion of what your opinion is. So the points to consider mentioning as like an indicative content is starting to discuss the differences between the medic and non-medic working within aesthetics. It's also important to start thinking about insurance differences between medics and non-medics, and that medics have a lot more to lose, shall we say, with regards to PINs and their other day jobs that may be out there, also with regards to prescribing abilities as well. So you can be talking about the differences that medics might have against non-medics, Looking as well at sometimes their insurance. There are some insurance companies that will only insure medics. There's obviously a higher premium for non-medics. And it's also important to make sure that it's an evaluation. So look at the positives and negatives about exclusions. Is that a fair thing to do? What are your opinions on it? But make sure you've got to base your opinions on facts, and then maybe have a conclusion overall what you have researched. So some of my research methods are used. Obviously, we're still talking about insurance, so it will still come under health and safety. So your health and safety executive will be a reliable resource to look at. Also, you can be looking at things like the General Medical Council or the General Dental Council, so your GMC and your GMD. They can be looking at sort of what their rules state for their members as a registered healthcare professional. I also found it useful to look at insurance companies because different insurance premiums and some insurance companies like I think it's Hamilton and Fraser won't insure non-medics. They will only insure medics, and it's looking at the fine print when you're looking at insurance, or even medics get cheaper insurance premiums, a bit like how some drivers can get cheaper insurance premiums. So looking at that, I also looked at solicitors and legal firms as well. So looking at the legalities as well. Just try and find some that are reliable and sort of more based in the UK rather than America or sort of other areas of Europe, because different countries will have different rules. You can even talk about how there is different rules within the UK, that Scotland has different rules, Wales has different rules, and England does. And obviously, because there's no clear border into these sort of countries, people might not be aware that it changes between countries. And then you can obviously look at the Department of Health and Social Care with regards to their reforms and their changes and the legislation that is obviously going through that consultation process. So like with previous SAQs, there is a marking scheme for it as well, and you are awarded up to a maximum of 10 points. So it's important to have a look at as well, what are your markers looking for? So remember, we're looking at the disparity between clinical insurance requirements for healthcare and non-healthcare professionals. So you need to, for a minimum, have outlined. And as previously stated, outlined means simple bullet pointed sentences, not really described in any form or at all. So you've just outlined the differences between medics, non-medics, or obviously I would probably recommend using the wording that's in the assignment, healthcare and non-healthcare professionals. If you're really sort of savvy with your marking criteria, you should be at least as your minimum be looking at the 6 to 7 marks. So this is where you have to describe a little bit of the detail between the differences of the insurance between them, and maybe give examples, specific examples of different insurance companies that will insure medics, non-medics, price premiums, things like that. And then obviously to get the really higher marks, you're going to have to show how well you have researched and examined in some detail and give your opinion. And it's got to be a validated opinion based on what you've found out and your facts. So it's important to make sure that you do your conclusion with a sort of point in mind that is based on something valid and real. So now we have a new command verb for assignments or for an SAQ paper. We now have to critically compare. So this is a brand new verb for this certificate in aesthetic practice. So you now have to look at, you have to decide and critically compare after you've looked at both sides of the argument. Do you agree with it? Examples in your own practice. You have got to make a judgment. You have got to decide what you think is best based on the truth or what you have found out. So you do have to look at the positives and negatives with this one. So the question is to critically compare the scope and the requirements of personal injury claims and medical malpractice claims. So if you're going to look at the differences, you really need to define what is personal injury claim and what is a medical malpractice claim, and sort of maybe bullet point or specify the differences between the two. You've got to look at as well things that'll involve if you go through a process with your insurance companies or a claim is made against you. You're going to have people like medical experts that are going to obviously be a witness, whether it be for and against. And you can think about sort of, how those opinions are formed. And medical malpractice is always going to have that medical expert, because this is where, again, the sort of wording used of being struck off or losing your pin. So personal injury claims may need a medical expert to sort of prove it, but it is not essential. But for your medical malpractice, it will be. You can also look at acts. You can look at the Law Reform Personal Injuries Act 1948. So that's going to be sort of one of those key pieces of UK legislation to look at. You can think about as well giving examples of how you deal with these in your own practice. Do you have insurance? Did you look around for what insurance to go with? Were you limited on what insurance you could go with? So you can again start to think about sort of what you have done to ensure your protection is there. So again, useful, reliable research resources. You've got the Cosmetic Practice Standards Authority, so the CPSA is used a lot, and obviously CPSA works with the Advertising Standards Agency, JCCP. It's on boards with regards to this sort of legislation coming in, so it's kind of a key body to look at. I also found I looked at sort of different websites with regards to insurance and sort of finding out what medical sort of negligence is. You've got the JCCP, and obviously, as previously stated, there's that legislation with the law reform and personal injuries. So they might be things to look at. I know it's not the most exciting subject to talk about, but I found it a real eye-opener with regards to legal terms and why sort of we should have insurance, how it protects us. Don't always think of it as a bad thing, think of it as a good thing as well, and looking at the positives just as much as the negatives. So again, your marking criteria is out of 10 and thinking about where you want to be on that scale. And again, you might be one of your stronger things to talk about. So we've got our 4 to 5. So remember, 4 to 5 marks is simplified basic information about personal injury claims and medical malpractice claims. A little bit more interpretation and giving examples within aesthetic practice will gain you more points. And then critically compare, like it's asked you in the question. You've gone into some depth. You've examined the differences between them, and then you've summarized your findings in a much more cohesive way. So fortunately, question 3 is working back to the evaluate, so the command verb that we're used to working with. So this time we're looking at client complaints, which I think is definitely something we need to look at because everyone's going to have their opinion, and whether their complaint is warranted or not, clients are going to complain. Everyone's going to dread when clients complain, but it's actually called, it is a risk sort of analysis type thing to look at when a client complains, what is the procedure we put in place so that if they rung and spoke to someone else, or what is the procedure so that you can manage this client complaint before it maybe gets too big and it doesn't need to have been that big. So you've got to look at or evaluate the process of managing client complaints and how effective this policy is. And as I said, if you're ever looking into management or you do a salon management qualification, this is something that you look into in quite a bit of depth. So you've got to look at, again, the positives and negatives. How do you feel? What is your opinion on what research has stated? And there is so much research out there. Don't forget, look at Google Scholar rather than your general Google, because your Google Scholar is going to bring up more research methods and research papers than just opinions. It's going to actually lead to facts. This might be a stronger question for you to answer because we've all been a customer at some point. So thinking about whether it's your own business, whether it's an aesthetic business, something else, is there a system in place for dealing with client complaints? If yes, you can talk about what system you do have in place and why you've got that system in place. And if no, what do you think would be a good system and why? And you could come to that decision after you've done your research. You could also start to think about, have you ever had to go through a complaint process yourself? Reflect on that. What was the process like? Was it handled well or was it not handled well? Why not? Just be a little bit careful though with going off on a tangent, because you can sort of reflect a bit too much. So try and put in a nutshell if you're going to use examples like that. Well, from research, you need to make sure you're researching, and there is thousands of client complaints, sort of procedures and recommendations. But from my own sort of research itself, I found that a complaint is better handled when it's handled by less members of staff, because obviously when it goes through lots of people, one person will say this, one person will say that, and it just aggravates the situation rather than resolving it. It's always best put in writing so that it's clear that everybody's reading from the same sheet of paper. Or that if there is discussions that are held, make sure that the discussions involve everyone in the process so that again, it's not getting mixed signals. Clients should also be provided with information. So if once you try to resolve a situation and it's not resolved and it needs to go further, they need to maybe have given information of how to take that and escalate that further. Remember, it might be in aesthetics, looking at sort of contact insurance companies. A lot of clients ask for your insurance details, but you first off need to contact your insurance company and let them know what's going on, and then they should advise you what you can and cannot give out, and what the process is going through any insurance claims. And obviously if you need to then get legal information, then you will follow the advice given to them. So you can talk about how you could try and de-escalate the situation by having an effective client complaint procedure in the first place. So as I said, there's loads and loads of things. You can look at things like customer complaints and client complaints, use those as your key terms. Look at Google Scholar rather than maybe your standard Google, or look at what both come up. But have a look at actual researched methods and proven ways of reducing or dealing with customer complaints effectively and swiftly and amicably. So I didn't want to sort of give any clear guidance because there's so many websites that you might find, and obviously we don't want everyone's assignments sounding the same and you're all using the same resources, because that wouldn't be very good on the quality control measure if everybody's assignments are the same. So your marking scheme for this, again, you should be starting to realize the pattern now. Basic information is not going to give you the higher points. So just summarizing in a nutshell, bullet pointing is not going to give you enough points. If you do that for every single question, you will not pass. 6 to 7 marks is where you put a little bit more detail in it. You've backed it with some information that you've found. You've maybe discussed sort of processes, how they could be implemented. And then to 8 to 10 marks on this is actually talking about the importance and the significance of actually having these processes within aesthetic practice and bringing it back to the main subject at the end. So you've now reached sort of the question 4 of 7, so halfway point. You are now going to be looking at evaluating. So we're going back to a very similar command verb that's been used in the majority of the SAQs. So you're going to evaluate the regulatory requirements relating to the advertising and marketing of aesthetic treatments. And this is a really interesting subject to look at. So you've got to look at the evaluation and determine worth or quality and do you agree, disagree, negatives and positives of advertising? And also it's starting to think about different aspects of advertising. Just make sure for this question it's asking you the regulatory requirements. So like the legal requirements. Don't go off talking about ethics and things like that, because that's going to come up at a later stage. So just make sure you're keeping it factual and thinking about legalities with regards to advertising and marketing. So in the UK, we have the Advertising Standards Authority, and they're the ones that look at the advertising, whether it be through social media, whether it be radio, whether it be TV, whether it be publications. So introducing who they are, what they do, is quite a good starting point on your assignment. Then you can start to look at things. Why do we need to be aware of the rules? Again, legally, morally, ethically. What are the rules for aesthetics? And there is everything you need to know on the Advertising Standards Authority page. They actually have a page that is specifically for this. Were you already aware of this? Link it back to your own practice. Do you already practice these rules, or have you now realized that you might be in breach of these rules without knowing? A lot of things with the Advertising Standards Agency, they're not going to go looking for the problems. So a lot of people don't really like the way the ASA works, because it has to be reported to them before they will research something. So this is where, again, people, rival businesses might often sort of be the ones reporting other businesses when they have breached the rules. They can also be quite slow in responding. Also, things like Google ads or Facebook ads, Instagram, social media ads, there's keywords. So if you put an ad in, it will flag up and not be permitted to show. So again, social media, you might have had something denied or taken down or reported. So words like injection, Botox, any of prescription meds basically will be flagged up. So people will often try and do different spellings for Botox, so using a 0 instead of an O, but then they'll obviously put that keyword in. So there's different ways that people have tried to advertise. The one that does get approval is not putting anti-wrinkle injections, but doing anti-wrinkle consultations, because that can cover numerous treatments and not just sort of toxin and using POMS. So you can look at, why do you think these rules are there? Do you value these rules? Are they positive, negative? Why do you think the rules are there in the first place? Is it again moral, ethical, legal? So looking at those would be easy to get your word count up and completed. And as I said, quite interesting. So again, the obvious research methods are going to be used. You can look at social media websites and sort of have what their policies are. You can obviously look at with regards to advertising of POMS with the MHRA, and then you can look at the JCCP and the ASA. Basically, the ASA is going to be dictating to all these other companies anyway, so they are sort of the head of what's going to be a requirement. So with your marking scheme, I feel that this one is something that you can really get your teeth into, and it's probably going to be an interesting question for you to write about. So you could be looking at the sort of higher marks with this sort of piece of work. So basic outlining again of the regulatory requirements is going to give you very minimal marks, but going into a little bit more detail and talking about how to manage them within an aesthetic practice and is going to give you the sort of the middle of the road marks. And then if you've really evaluated them, you've researched them well, you've evidenced that research, then you've judged the value of having these rules and making sure you follow them. That's going to give you the higher marks. But remember, your marker is going to be looking at the way you write, the content you write, the formatting, the referencing. So again, it's not just about answering the question, it's about how you demonstrate how well you've answered that question. So we're still looking at evaluating. So we're basically researching something and then making a judgment over our research. So we're looking at the positives and negatives and again concluding whether you think they're good or bad or your opinion on them. Do you agree with it? So we're evaluating now the ethical responsibilities of advertising and marketing aesthetic treatments. So the previous question was looking at the legal requirements. This is looking at more the ethical requirements. So it's not something that's prosecuted by law essentially, unless it goes against sort of equality and diversity. But it's looking at sort of that moral and ethical dilemma of advertising and thinking about sort of preying on weaker people, people that maybe have body dysmorphia, people who worry about their appearance with maturing clients, or even looking at the sort of younger targeting age group. Is that a moral and ethical responsible thing to do, targeting on under 18s or even people just over 18? So you can talk about your opinion as well as sort of general opinion within the aesthetic industry. So this is where we start looking at the ethical side of things. So we've come away from the legal things, and remember, ethical can come under equality and diversity, so being aware of that. But it's starting to sort of prey on maybe weaker people, people that might suffer from body dysmorphia, age groups of people, and are your adverts targeting them? We know that social media is starting to crack down on before and afters and sort of not putting those out there, and people try and get clever and sort of try and do them in a different way. Do you think this is ethical? What are your opinions on this? Do you think it's right or wrong? I mean, it's a hard one because a lot of people will want to see people's work when deciding on a practitioner, but is it targeting different people and the wrong kind of people? The Keogh report is something that I used for a lot of my assignments. So if you haven't already read it or looked at it, I would definitely recommend looking it up. And it's something that will sort of cover quite a lot of your points in this. Again, try and link it to your own practice and start to look at the ethical side of being an aesthetics practitioner. So again, the ASA has quite a section on looking at sort of the ethical dilemmas. And as I said, you've got the sort of Department of Health and Social Care Act, you've got the Keogh report, and looking at the regulation of cosmetic interventions are key things to research, but you may obviously find other ones. Again, we know the marking criteria by now. Basic is your 4 to 5. So you've just summarized sort of ethical responsibilities. 6 to 7 marks, you've described them with a little bit more detail and you've summarized how they should be applied within aesthetic practice. And then obviously 8 to 10 marks is actually you've evaluated these responsibilities with regards to marketing and advertising. You've judged the values and how they should be implemented and why they should be implemented. Put that little bit more of what and why to get the higher marks. So we're trying to change of subject now. So with this one, you're looking at the evaluating the purpose and value of CPD. Now, we're not talking the CPD group or Centres of CPD Excellence. They are companies. That is not what CPD stands for. CPD stands for Continual Professional Development. And what's happened within aesthetics is that it's got very blurred and murky over the last few years. So it meant that people now sort of see the word CPD and think of certificates and training courses, which they are, but that's a part of CPD, continual professional development. And lots of people have to do CPD as part of their job. Medics, non-medics, it depends on the job role. For teachers and assessors, they need to do a certain percentage of evidence CPD to be able to keep up with their day job. Same with medics when they want to revalidate. So you've got to look at what the purpose and the value of CPD, not CPD certificates.
So make sure you stay on the right track. So you've got to judge the significance of basically keeping up to date with whichever industry you're in, why it's there, and what do you think the value is. So positives and negatives. I mean, a negative can be that it's a lot of money maybe to keep paying out for courses, but the positive is you remain up to date. So it's that head and heart scenario. Do you agree with people having to do set CPD? There is lots to discuss within this assignment question. So as I've said, it's not talking about CPD groups that offer accredited courses. It's more about talking about continual professional development as a whole. What's the value of staying up? Is there any legal requirements? And it is something that they're wanting to bring it in as one of the recommendations with legislation moving forward within aesthetics. Is this something yourself that you practice? What's the value of staying up to date? It's things like first aid has to be done very regularly. Some people do it as a yearly refresher, some people as a maximum of 3 years between training, because rules change and things become more updated. So it's important to stay up to date so that, again, in first aid incidences, is to make sure that people's lives are not put at risk. So you can find lots of avenues to discuss and cover your assignment, and it's quite a nice flowy and easier assignment question than maybe some of the regulatory side of things. So there are loads of CPD websites and research methods you can use, but try and link it back to aesthetic practice. So try and find ones that are maybe specific for that. You can look at, again, the differences between medics and non-medics and staying up to date. So there is probably some of the methods you have used for research already. You'll be able to reuse them for this question too. So the marking scheme, again, your just basic outlines is going to give you your minimum marks, but maybe not enough minimum marks to get the whole paper through. You've got 6 to 7 points where you've gone to a little bit of more explanation and you've clearly explained the purpose and value of CPD, and you've demonstrated how you have a clear level of understanding about CPD. Obviously, to get it to the higher marks, it's all of that plus how you sort of find it significant within the use of aesthetic practice.
And we're at the last question on this sort of short answer question paper. So again, we're still evaluating. So we're looking at positives and negatives and determining the importance and worth of them. Are they pointless or are they really needed? So we're going to evaluate the range of CPD activities available in aesthetic practice and their suitability. So like I said, attending webinars can be good. Reading a book, again, depends on how outdated the book is, if you've understood it. So different types of activities out there and what counts and what doesn't count. And that can be your opinion as well.
So points that you could bring up on this question are things like structured learning, whether it be in person or do you think online sort of learning has its place, and it varies between people's opinions, leading to a certificate or not. It can be mandatory in-house training, so they might be delivered in the workplace. Will that cover insurance requirements? Attending conferences, seminars, webinars, again, webinars being online. How do you evidence that? And is that enough to keep you up to date with changes? Another one that a lot of people forget about is peer observations, sort of watching other practitioners, which can be very hard to do if you are a lone worker. So could it be something you connect with lone workers in your area, and rather than seeing them as a competition, see them as a resource? So think about the values of these. Do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? Do you see complications with regards to doing CPD and some of the methods of CPD? Again, some people are very for or against online methods. And you'll also find that you'll be using very similar research tools and methods that you have previously looked at with regards to CPD and some of your other assignments. And again, your marking criteria, you'll be seeing the practice now. So basic summaries will only give you the minimum marks. A little bit of explanation and sort of some of your personal opinions and examples will give you the middle of the road marks. And the highest marks will be awarded when you have shown a higher level of knowledge, you've evaluated what you've found out, you've determined the value of these activities and their place within the aesthetic environment. As with previous papers, make sure each of your answers you have backed with reliable methods of research and information. Make sure that the information that you have used is referenced, even though it's not a pass requirement, it is something that you want to start to apply some knowledge and understanding and show your markers where you are gathering this knowledge from. You are signing up to a level 5 qualification with the plans to progress to level 7. Get in the good practice now. Practice as much as you can, so when you have to do referencing, it's become second nature, and you may already have the references stored in your Word documents, so it just makes it very, very easy. And I have shown how to do that on previous online learning. So please start to look and use the sources that are available to you. Try to stay within your word count so that you don't go off on a tangent and lose points by missing the main point of the assignment. Remember, you're not awarded points on the amount of words you write, you're writing on quality, not quantity. And don't wait to do them all in one day because it's a lot of words to write in one day. Pick a question that you feel you can answer that day depending on where your headspace is at. Please make sure when you submit your work that it is on the QUALIFI paperwork that they have asked for information to be sent to. As I've previously said, you can write drafts on another document and copy and paste the information over. Just make sure it's formatted correctly and that you are following the guidance that QUALIFI have stated. All work will be returned to you. Good luck with your work.